Welcome, everybody, to the Sports Fluent Fantasy Live. This week, we're going to have same thing as every week. We're going to go through our starts, our sits, our sleepers, as well as, some waiver wire pickups, some guys that you probably should have had on your waiver wire and have picked up so far this week. If they're still available, you might want to look at going in now and picking them up as kind of free agents. And remember, when we talk waiver wire, I think it's really important before we get into the starts and the sits and the waiver wires to remember one really important aspect. Keep an eye on who your opponents or the other people in your league are dropping, because a lot of times they might beat you to the punch on someone who's hot this week. And we'll talk a little bit this week about those players that you should watch out for, because they have a really big week. And we talked about it a little bit last week, where this person's just had a huge week. They kind of came out of nowhere. Everybody scrambles on the waiver wire to go and pick them up, but then you never really hear from them again. Not to say, last season, if you recall, TJ Hawkinson of the Lions had a huge week one, like monster week one, and you didn't really hear much from him after week one. This year, he's been a little bit better, a little bit more consistent, but those types of guys you got to watch out for. So we'll go through the starts and the sits, some sleeper picks, some people to watch out for, as well as some waiver wire people who are still available. Typically, I try to keep the waiver wire guys, anybody under kind of 50% owned or rostered in leagues. I try to actually keep it under even 30%, but there's a couple that are a little bit higher that you should be kind of aware of. I'll give you some guys to be careful of, be worried about. And I'm also going to go through, obviously, some questions. We had a ton of questions this week, and one of them being just to kind of review who are the top 4 or 5 at each position in fantasy so far. So we'll kind of go through some of those, talk about, are they a surprise? Did we expect them to be there? There's actually not a lot of surprises if you look at kind of the top 5. But, let me know your thoughts, too, if you see someone who's in the top 10 that you're like, I never would have thought this person would be there. And we'll read them out from the comments. So we'll start right up at the top, as we always do, with our starts for this week at quarterback. So this is one that I had as a start last week because it was a really good matchup. And Ben Roethlisberger got a week off. I don't think he wanted the week off against the Titans, but he got it. So they've had an extra week to prepare for Philadelphia, and I think he's going to come out. He's a little bit angry that they took away or gave him a bye so early in the season, and he's losing his bye. He came out earlier today and said, it's not fair what kind of happened to me. I like Ben Roethlisberger with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, especially going against this Philadelphia defense. So look for Ben Roethlisberger to have a huge game. So this one, I'm saying it's a start, and it's, for those that are streaming quarterbacks, or for those of you that maybe have Matt Stafford, let's say, and he's on a bye week, Daniel Jones of the Giants. And the only reason I'm going to say Daniel Jones is because until they show me any different, this Dallas defense is horrible. And I still think Dallas wins the game and wins the game big, because the Giants are just horrible. But I think Daniel Jones, and you'll hear me talk about a couple other Giants players this week, might be someone to take a look at, because, like I said, this Dallas defense just is allowing so many points, so many yards on the ground, in the air. They're horrible. So the 2 starts at quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger and Daniel Jones. For your sits this week, and this one hurts me because I'm really high on Joe Burrow of the Bengals when it comes to fantasy, but this week's matchup against Baltimore is not a good one. So I would put a hold on Joe Burrow for this week and sit Joe Burrow. The next one was a sit I talked about last week, who I also said might be a drop completely, unless you're maybe in a 2 QB league or a super flex. But Carson Wentz, especially against, again, a well-rested Pittsburgh defense, I'm not starting Carson Wentz no matter what. And then a sleeper to look out for. So this is an odd one. So the Seattle defense has historically been good, and their secondary has been Fantastic. Not so much this year. They're allowing more points in fantasy to QBs than any other team in the league. And although I don't like Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota offense per se, I think it's a good matchup, and they're starting to show some signs of life. So I think you can, as a sleeper, watch out for Kirk Cousins. I have a 2 QB league. I'm starting him in that league because I think he's going to have a good game. Here's the one to watch out for. So be very careful. Always you should be careful of the Thursday night games, but especially when you have a older quarterback going up against a pretty good defense that can put pressure on the QB, right? Be careful. I'm not saying don't start Tom Brady, especially because of what he's done so far this season, but I told you they were going to get blown out in week 1, and they did. Be careful of Tom Brady against the Bears defense on Thursday. It could be one of those catch games that can get you in trouble. So be careful of that one if you have Tom Brady as your quarterback. So we'll jump from the starts and sits. We'll go over to the first question. All right, so I like this one. These are trade offers. So I'm being offered DK Metcalf for Sammy Watkins and Damian Harris. Jump on it. Take that deal all day long. Sammy Watkins is a kind of flex play at best, even in that Kansas City offense. And Damian Harris, running backs in New England, like he'll have this week, I think it will be another good week for him, like last week. But long term, you never know. Once they're, Sony Michel and others kind of get back into the mix, they've got Rex Burkhead. They always have, in this offense, Cam Newton's going to be running the ball a little bit. That's a tough kind of for the whole season to say, yeah, Damian Harris is my RB2 and I'm just rolling with him. So if you can pick up DK Metcalf, who leads the league or is tied for yards receiving in the league this year, take him, right? Take him as fast as you can. Make that trade 100% all day long. You know what? We'll do 2 questions. Deontay Johnson or risk it with Michael Thomas? I'm really high on the Pittsburgh offense this week against Philly. Since the beginning of the season, I've been very high on Deontay Johnson. We're not sure of Michael Thomas's status, if he's going to be fully healthy, etc. So if you got both, I say, and if you have another wide receiver, I don't know who your other wide receivers are, but if you have Michael Thomas, if you don't have any other wide receivers, then maybe play both of them. If you're deep at the wide receiver and you have to pick one, Michael Thomas or Deontay Johnson, I go Deontay Johnson this week just because I really like the matchup against Philadelphia. All right, we have one here in the chat. Kittle or Jonnu Smith? Kittle, always. You got to start Kittle. I'd look at Smith, maybe even you're going to look like a real football team. You might go with a 2 tight end set. So depending on what your flex situation is with your bye weeks, injuries, etc., you might want to play both. But if you have to pick one, I go with Kittle. All right, so back to the starts and sits. Running backs. For those of you who were like me in a couple of my leagues where you took Kareem Hunt, you had him in as a flex player a couple of weeks when the matchup was good. We're sorry to see Nick Chubb get hurt, but for Kareem Hunt owners, this is huge. He becomes RB1, play him pretty much every week. Very limited. I don't want to say it's matchup dependent. Be careful. Like if he's playing the 49ers, you might want to be careful. But other than that, I think Kareem Hunt now, as long as Chubb is out, is a definite play. This week against the Colts, play him with confidence. You're good. The next one, and this one, you don't have a lot of weeks left. You don't have a lot of weeks left for Mike Davis of the Panthers. The reports are that Christian McCaffrey is going to be back in week 6. Week 7 at the latest. So you want to make sure you have Mike Davis and take advantage of him, especially much like Christian McCaffrey in PPR leagues, right? Super strong as a receiver out of the backfield as well. This week against Atlanta, he's going to have a huge game as well. So start Kareem Hunt and Mike Davis this week. On the sits, and this one hurts because, he was high on my waiver wire 2 weeks ago. I told you guys. But this week's got a tough matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. So Myles Gaskins, sit him this week against the 49ers if you can. The other one had a big week last week. I have him again on a couple of my teams. He's one of those ones where if the New Orleans Saints are playing a team that gives up a lot of rushing yards or a lot of rushing touchdowns, you can probably play Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. If Kamara, like last year, gets hurt and misses a game or two, whether it be for maintenance or a minor injury or something, we don't want any big injuries on anybody, Latavius Murray is a start. But this week, against the Chargers, who are a good run defensive team, you're sitting Latavius Murray. For my sleeper pick, told you I was going to talk about this game a lot. Devontae Freeman against Dallas. Again, until Dallas gave up 307 rushing yards to Cleveland last week. So if there's ever a game that Devontae Freeman might get some action, it's this game against Dallas. So as a sleeper, if you want to be kind of sneaky with it, look for Devontae Freeman to surprise some people this week in Dallas. Back to our questions. Slayton, Darius Slayton or T.Y. Hilton? Yeah, that's a tough one. Slayton, again, he's going against the Dallas defense, so I would be inclined to go with Slayton. However, T.Y. Hilton has a good matchup this week against Cleveland as well, who gave up 500 and something passing yards to Dallas last week. So it's not to say that they're any better. If T.Y. Hilton's going to have a game, here's how I look at T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton's like my golf game. I start playing and I stink. And then when I'm about to throw my clubs in the lake and give up, I hit like a beautiful 275-yard drive right down the fairway. And I go, oh, I love this game and I'm going to play it again. That's what T.Y. Hilton's going to do to you, right? He's had a horrible start to the season in terms of fantasy. And this week when you're like, should I drop him? Should I keep him? Should I try to trade him away? Will anybody take him? He gets this really nice matchup against Cleveland. If he does nothing this week, drop him. However, he's going to probably put up 125 yards and 2 touchdowns, and you're like, oh, I love him again. So just be careful of T.Y. Hilton. So did I answer the question? I'd probably go Slayton this week with Dallas if I had to pick one, but I might be kicking myself in the pants on Monday morning or Tuesday morning after I see what happens this week. Back to our starts and sit, and T.Y. Hilton, I should listen to my own advice. So with our starts this week, our 2 starters, Will Fuller against Jacksonville. This one's also one of those ones where anytime Will Fuller's healthy, especially now that DeAndre Hopkins is off in Arizona, you want to play Fuller because when he's healthy, he's dynamic. He's a great fantasy wide receiver. We don't know what we're going to get from Romeo Crennel's version of the Houston Texans, right? Has Bill O'Brien been gone long enough for him to even make any changes or implement anything that he wants to do? He's only the interim head coach until we see what they do at the GM and head coach level in Houston. So I'd still say, listen, they're probably going to, against Jacksonville, they'll probably throw the ball a lot. They don't have a great running game. So I'm going Will Fuller against the Jags. He's a good start. And then Robbie Anderson is back this week, so make sure he's healthy, of course. But if healthy and starting, Robbie Anderson versus Atlanta, another good start at wide receiver. For the sits, so we talked about one already in kind of part of the last question. T.Y. Hilton at Cleveland, like I said, if this is the 1 week where he's either going to make it or he's either going to make it or you should drop him. And so one of the questions was, do I drop T.Y. Hilton? Listen, if you can trade T.Y. Hilton, I always say this: if there's people who have kind of name recognition, the David Johnsons of the world, T.Y. Hilton, to people who, depends what kind of league you play in, right? Like if you play in a league where it's people who know what they're doing, okay, you probably won't get away with this. But you might, go to the bottom of the standings, even in week 4, and be like, hey, who can I maybe dump off a T.Y. Hilton and see what I can grab for him? Try to trade him. If you can't, wait and see what happens this week. But this week, I sit him because I don't have confidence in him. The second sit this week is another one that really hurts me, is A.J. Green of the Bengals. And they've got, a tough matchup against Baltimore. He has not been playing. Not that he hasn't been playing well, it's just Joe Burrow hasn't been looking for him. He's been throwing the ball to, Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. Joe Mixon kind of got it going last week. So A.J. Green's another one where if you can find someone who, maybe is a Bengals fan or some nostalgia from what he's done historically, see if you can trade AJ Green, because, I don't even see his fit on this Bengal team right now. Like, from a pure football standpoint, I don't know if this is true or not, but they might be looking to trade him. They might even drop him, just depending on what the salary cap implications would be for doing that. But I'd stay away from AJ Green until proven otherwise. And then one to watch out for, so this kind of goes back to the Will Fuller thing, is because we don't know what we're going to get out of Romeo Crennel with his offense and with his defense. So I'm going to say his name wrong. I know that, so I apologize if I do. But Laviska Shenault Jr., wide receiver for the Jags. He's going to be a night. He should have a nice game against Houston, unless Romeo Crennel does something miraculous and changes around that Houston defense versus what we've seen so far this season. So he's one to look for as a sleeper. Back to our questions. All right, another trade one. The offer is DeAndre Hopkins and James White is being offered to me for David Johnson, Jared Jeudy, and Chase Edmonds. You're getting the best player in that trade. It's very much like a real life trade, right? Hopkins, you don't really know what you're going to get out of James White again. However, Hopkins is definitely the best player in the trade. Is there anyone? David Johnson is, a matchup dependent, TD dependent at this point. Running back, Jared Judy's locks coming back, so that might help his stock a little bit. And then Chase Edmonds, who knows what's going on. Kenyon Drake, does Kenyon Drake get it going again? And then Edmonds, becomes kind of irrelevant, or right? Does Kenyon Drake take a step back and become the number 2 back, and they give Edmonds a chance? So again, it's iffy. So if you need a wide receiver and you're okay at your running back and you don't need David Johnson and Chase Edmonds, like if they're like your kind of RB3s and flex kind of running backs or RB2s, yeah, I make that trade and I get Hopkins because he's the best player in the deal. Next question is Kareem Hunt or Robbie Anderson. Okay, so I have both of them as definite starts this week. Kareem Hunt and Robbie Anderson. However, as I mentioned before, with the injury to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt is in the RB1, like for sure. So let's go Kareem Hunt all day long over Robbie Anderson. Although I do think Robbie Anderson's going to have a nice week. Tight ends. So tight ends are 2 starts for this week. Hunter Henry at the Saints this week is a start for me. And so this is one you got to be careful of because I had mentioned, it asked me the question earlier about Kittles or Jonnu Smith. Smith may not play this week again. So there's about 20 Tennessee Titans who have tested positive for COVID. I think I just heard 2 more today. So that game might actually get canceled. So if the Titans play the Bills, start Smith. Obviously, if the game gets postponed, I don't know what they're going to do with the Titans if they miss 2 games in a row, how they're going to move around the schedule and figure out what to do there. But just be mindful, keep an eye on what's happening with all of your Titans players. I think I got Jonnu Smith and Derrick Henry on one of my teams, so I'm a little nervous about that one. I hope they can figure it out and play their game. For the sits this week, Mike Gesicki of the Dolphins, again, against that 49ers defense. Gesicki's been kind of disappointing for all the hype we kind of gave him the first few weeks of the season. Unfortunately, he's also got a terrible matchup this week. So he's a sit for me. And then here's one where I'm kind of putting in a bunch of the questions I got and a bunch of comments I've heard into a sit, because this should answer all the questions that I got about Rob Gronkowski. He's a blocking tight end right now in Tampa Bay. So unless that changes, right, you want a tight end in Tampa Bay, take Cameron Brate with the OJ Howard injury. He's going to be the one that's going to catch more passes at the tight end position in Gronkowski. Again, until proven otherwise, he's just there. I don't know, for the name, for the blocking. He might catch a pass here or there. But they have too many weapons, especially now short term. Godwin's hurt, but especially once Godwin is healthy, there's too many weapons on that team to really rely on Gronk, who hasn't really showed us anything this year. Some say he probably should have stayed retired. I think he'll get it going. Like, I honestly think, halfway through the season, you might start to see, I won't say the Gronk of old, but I think you'll see him more involved in the offense. But for right now, he's just not. So he's a sit this week. For my sleeper, I like this one. I'm having to start this one in one of my leagues, so I better like this one, is Eric Ebron, again, against Philly. And it's a good matchup. And like I said, I think Pittsburgh's going to score a lot of points this week. So Eric Ebron be a sleeper there. Why? Sorry, this is a good question. This actually goes back to my golf analogy. So the question is, why do I play fantasy football? That's a great question. I ask myself that quite often, depending on my team and how they did that week. You play because it's fun, and we like the abuse. Earlier I just said kind of about the golf, where you're having a horrible round of golf, and then you hit one beautiful shot, and you're like, oh, I love this game. I'm gonna play it forever. That's my fantasy football. That's the best I could tell you. Is you like the punishment. That's why you play. And then, okay, standard. Okay, we're looking for a flex. 1 of 4 in a standard league. Deontay Johnson, Slayton, Ayuk, or T. Higgins. Oof. That's loaded. You only have one spot, one flex spot for one of those 4 guys. Listen, I'm super high, I told you, on Pittsburgh, so I'll keep it consistent and say Deontay Johnson. He's a start for me. Of those 4, I think he's the one that you can probably – he's got the lowest floor. So, I don't think Higgins is going to have a big game this week against Baltimore. Ayuk possibly against Miami. Slayton, again, has a good matchup against Dallas. But again, the Giants haven't shown me enough. So if I had to pick one who has kind of the lowest floor, I'd go Deontay Johnson. If I had to pick one of those in a standard league, because obviously you're then kind of yard/touchdown dependent. So I'd go Deontay Johnson. To the waiver wire. So I had mentioned earlier, I tried to kind of give some guys who have limited, not in a lot of, not rostered in a lot of leagues. Let me know, if you have any specific questions kind of as we go through this. And so we got, so if you haven't picked them up already and you need a quarterback, or you're streaming quarterbacks, or I really like Justin Herbert of the Chargers. Again, I like teams, especially quarterbacks that are on teams, as long as they don't turn the ball over a lot, that are going to be losing games or kind of down in games, and they're going to have to pass a lot. And Justin Herbert, again, so you got to be careful, because now word is that Tyrod Taylor might come back. The coaching staff said when he's healthy, he's going to be the starter again. I think Herbert has played way too good for them to make a change. But if they do, then obviously strike that off your list. In terms of running backs, I'll stick with the same team, Justin Jackson. So with the Austin Eckler injury, right, it's opened up a spot. So Justin Jackson is one that I'm going to bring onto my team. I don't know that I'm starting him this week because Kelly's still going to get the bulk of the workload. But Justin Jackson in deeper leagues, he's only owned in about 17% of leagues. So Justin Jackson, I think, is a nice piece to bring on. Same thing I mentioned earlier about Chase Edmonds. Right, something's going to have to give with Kenyon Drake. They're either going to have to give the ball to Edmonds more, or again out of the backfield as a receiver, or Kenyon Drake's going to have to wake up and kind of do what he did at the tail end of last year. He's a much better back than he's showing, specifically especially in fantasy. But I would pick up Chase Edmonds as a kind of down the road opportunity. We talked about T. Higgins and the Bengals. Wouldn't start him this week, but he's one that's still available in quite a few leagues, surprisingly. Actually, let me pause there for a second and go back to the Kenyon Drake thing. If Drake does get surpassed on the depth charts by Edmonds, right, he might be another one of those, look to trade. He's in the drop conversation. Going to be honest with you, he's been horrible this year. So he's come out on Twitter and said, for those that don't have faith in me, drop me, but I'm going to get it back. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for a couple more weeks. Scotty Miller of the Bucks. So again, this is until Godwin comes back. If you really kind of are desperate at wide receiver, look at Scotty Miller. Here's your kind of 2-4 Bucks package. If you're going to get a tight end from the Bucks, it's Cameron Brate is the one that you pick up. He's also available. Again, that's dependent on. So O.J. Howard's gone. He's hurt, but obviously dependent on Chris Godwin's health. Because once Godwin comes back, I think Evans and Godwin are going to get more than their fair share of opportunities in that offense. And so this one's one where everybody went crazy for him this week. In all of my leagues, whoever was the first for waiver wire pickups picked up this tight end. Obviously, from the Green Bay Packers, and I was probably say his name wrong too, but Robert Tonyan or Chonyan, whatever. Be careful. Be careful because, I think he's tight end 2 right now. Let me check here. Yeah, he's tight end 2 right now, but that's with Davante Adams out. He's getting a lot of the touchdowns. Like I think he had 2 or 3 touchdowns on Monday night. That's because Davante Adams isn't there, who normally would be that red zone target. Historically, now I know this is a different offense for Aaron Rodgers, but historically, right, Aaron Rodgers has a tight end spike and then kind of drops off and you don't see them for a while. So if you got him, play him. Just be careful once Adams comes back. So just not to say don't do anything with him, right? If you could trade him for a nice piece, do that. But be very careful of him moving forward once Davante Adams gets back and gets healthy. And here's kind of your bonus one. So I really like Mo Ali Cox, the tight end for the Colts. I just, if you have a roster spot, pick him up. I think he's going to have a really good second half of the season. Phillip Rivers, I think, will need to be looking at his tight ends a little bit more with the lack of production from his wide receivers. So I really like Ali Cox for the Colts. All right, so that's it for questions and the waiver wires and the starts and sits. Let me know if you have any other questions. So, there's one last question here. We were asked to kind of go through who were the top. We talked about this at the top of the show. Who are the leaders? So I used the NFL.com PPR league kind of scoring, which is kind of the standard, I think, for most leagues now. So with quarterbacks, Russell Wilson, who, if you go back a couple, like last year, I think he didn't have a great, still good. But if you go back a couple of seasons, Russell Wilson was the fantasy leader again, and he sits on top. This year, he's having another great season, both in fantasy, obviously, and in real. Like he's looking like an MVP candidate. He's got the Seahawks off to a great start. So Russell Wilson is there. Dak Prescott's another interesting one because his defense is so bad that I think you're going to see Dallas in a lot of really high-scoring games. So in terms of fantasy, that's great. If you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, that's horrible. But he's going to throw for a lot of yards, probably for a lot of touchdowns. So he's second right now. Look for that trend to continue. Josh Allen, continuing what he did from last year, where he's going to throw for a couple of touchdowns, run for a couple of touchdowns, get you some yards on the ground. In my main league, he's my starting QB. So I'm a big fan of Josh Allen's. Then Patrick Mahomes, obviously, and Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, we all thought, they were going to put him out to pasture, and they drafted his replacement, and he's come out with a chip on his shoulder and really kind of pushing them to keep the young guy on the bench, I guess, for a couple of more years. He looks fantastic this year. For the running back position, Alvin Kamara. It's funny. I had Alvin Kamara, I think, the past 3 years on almost all my fantasy teams. I didn't draft him this year. I probably could have, but I didn't. And he's, of course, the top running back. So there you go. Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones is a good one because he's looked phenomenal, both as a receiver out of the backfield, heck, as a receiver split out wide, obviously as a running back. And, he was getting those touchdowns last year, and we kind of talked about, will he be able to keep it up? And so far, so good. The only thing that's going to hurt him in fantasy is the Packers are good, right? They're 4-0. They're looking forward to kind of what's going to happen in the playoffs, right? I think they're going to win their division. They're the best team in their division. And you saw the last game, I think, on Monday night, right, where Jamal Williams was getting a lot of touches. And that's to keep Aaron Jones fresh because it's a long season. We're only a quarter of the way in, and they're going to try to keep him rested. So it's going to hurt you a little bit in fantasy, but still, he's obviously has a great start to the season. Then we got Dalvin Cook, who's, again, he's only a surprise because Dalvin Cook, is Minnesota's offense hasn't looked really good, but he's still been able to keep to have a strong start to the fantasy season. Then Ezekiel Elliott, he's going to get his touches. He's one of the few kind of true workhorse running backs still left in the league. Tony Pollard does not take away a lot of his touches. So Ezekiel Elliott, he's in fourth right now and going to, always be strong, barring injury or anything like that. And then Chris Carson. So that's actually a surprise because, over the past few years, we haven't known what to do with the Seattle running back. It's always been this committee, but Chris Carson, as long as he's healthy, again, we had a scare a couple of weeks ago with the ankle, but he's healthy. He's looked good. And Pete Carroll has looked like, he's just going to play him and give him his opportunities. So he's hit number 5 spot. So this kind of goes back to the bad Dallas defense thing. Amari Cooper is number 1 amongst wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins, we didn't think he'd miss a beat in Arizona with Kyler Murray, and he hasn't. Calvin Ridley. So we were very high. If you remember our kind of pre-NFL season talk, we talked a lot about Calvin Ridley kind of taking over that number 1 spot in Atlanta. I think it happened a little bit faster than even most expected from a fantasy perspective. Julio Jones, right, he's getting a little bit older. He's dealing with some nagging injuries. And Calvin Ridley has looked fantastic, minus the last game. And then back to Seattle, Tyler Lockett is in 4th. And then Stephon Diggs in Buffalo. That's one, when he went to Buffalo, we had a lot of debate about the fact that, will Josh Allen, get him enough opportunities? Will he throw the ball deep? Will Stephon Diggs lose what he had in Minnesota when, having Thielen on the other side, Kirk Cousins, who likes to throw the ball? But he's looked fantastic so far this season. And then the last one we're going to cover before we let you go is at the tight end. No surprise, the number 1 fantasy tight end is Travis Kelce. Number 2 right now is Robert Tonyan, Robert, for the tight end for the Packers. And again, he already told you the warning about him, so we'll leave that alone. Waller of the Raiders. Fant, who's dealing with some injuries, listed as questionable this week. But I think he and Locke are both going to kind of come back at the same time. So he's a tight end that you can probably roll with for the rest of the season if healthy. And then Mark Andrews of the Ravens, right? That was showing that last year wasn't a fluke, doing good things in fantasy this year. So there's your top 5 at each position. We answered a hand dozen of your question, your starts and sits. I'll post the starts and sits later tonight on Instagram and Twitter if you need a copy of them. And if you have your questions, either send them here or you can always reach me at anthonyk@sportsfluent.com.